Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to do a Ram revisited review to celebrate its 50th anniversary, which is coming up on Monday, the 17th of May, 50 years since its original release. Pretty big anniversary as they go. Originally got to #1 in the UK after being kept off the top for 3 weeks by Sticky Fingers, Rolling Stones, and then later kept off the top by Bridge Over Troubled Water, and then took over from Bridge Over Troubled Water for #1 for 1 week, at #1 for 1 week, and then Bridge replaced it the following week. And in the US, it got to #2 and was kept off for the #1 spot by Tapestry, Carole King. So this is the album. This is my UK original Apple copy. One of the good things about this album is, which I like about it, is, and this is an original Apple in a sleeve actually, and I just love to see this album on Apple, and I was a bit disappointed firstly in the late 70s when I bought my repressing of it. It was on the Capitol label, and then the new archive editions are on a new kind of custom-made label, and they've kind of dropped the Apple, which I think is a shame because it's part of its history. And I know Paul had all those disputes with Klein and the rest of the Beatles at the time, and that's probably why McCartney and Ram have not appeared on Apple since. But you know, if it was up to me, I'd be faithful to the original and put it out on Apple. Anyway, that was quite a minor point. It's an interesting album, this, because it's so personal, and Paul lets us know about what he's feeling somewhat more than on most of his albums, and it's a kind of strange mixture of home, domesticity, love, and a fair amount of angst, quite a bit of it directed at his former Beatle colleagues, and that makes it an interesting listen, and it was certainly enough to provoke John Lennon into retaliating on the Imagine album, not only parodying this sleeve with the postcard with the pig, but including the venomous track "How Do You Sleep." Now the lyrics aimed at John and George and Ringo were pretty harmless for the most part. Too many people preaching practices, don't let them tell you what you want to be, or too many people going underground. And then later on in the same song, that was your first mistake. You took your lucky break and broke it in two. Now what can be done for you? You broke it in two. So yeah, it was aimed at John, but it wasn't too nasty. It was just being honest. Anyway, John saw it otherwise, and he also read the lyrics to Three Legs as against him, and he even read the lyrics to Dear Boy as being against him, even though Paul said it was written to Linda's first husband. You never knew what you had, you'll never know what you missed, dear boy, because Linda's husband divorced Linda pretty quickly, I think, or the marriage didn't last too long. So this album's definitely bears the hallmarks of Beatle Paul, because it was recorded, for the most part, although not released till May '71, recorded before Christmas in New York. I think it was August to December 1970, and so within a very short period of Paul having announced the split, so-called, in April of that year. He's a funny mixture of confident 1 minute and then a bit unsure of himself the next minute. So he's got a few songs are kind of cobbled together as kind of medleys, and on the downside, maybe a couple of them go on too long and he doesn't quite know how to finish them, such as Backseat of My Car. But on the other hand, it's a glorious declaration of independence, saying I'm not with the Beatles anymore. This is me and Linda doing what we do. I think in this Melody Maker, New Musical Express, my new LP is Sweaty Rock, and the journalist Alan McDougall says it's 100 times better than McCartney and the first album. And Paul says, yeah, this is more me, this is what I do. And he was very proud, and I think he was a bit knocked for six when the critics mauled it, really. Mutton dressed as ram. This was my clip from the Melody Maker. I spent an afternoon at the Melody Maker offices in the early 90s. They let me have access to all the back issues, and I just photocopied loads of articles, and this was one by Chris Charlesworth reviewing McCartney's album, and he basically says, a good album by anyone's standards, and certainly better than the majority released by other groups and singers. Trouble is, you expect too much from a man like Paul McCartney. And that was the general feeling at the time. Let me just read you another contemporary review from Alan Smith in the NME. Certainly it would be true to say it contains not one worthwhile lasting piece of music. Almost all of the songs are cliches of things he's done before, and in many cases the parodies of himself and others have become a reality, and the reality a parody. Suffice to say that Ram is the worst thing Paul McCartney has ever done. So then in the intervening years, the reviews still stayed fairly negative in the 70s, as the 70s wore on, with the Cara and Tyler book dismissing it basically. Nicholas Schaffner saying there's a few good tracks, but mostly dismissing it. Bob Woofenden in this book, The Beatles Apart, released in 1981, is still, I'm afraid, pretty disparaging. In fact, Paul served himself badly as songwriter and appallingly as producer. He clearly lacked the guidance of someone to explain how to nurture the fetal compositions into full-blooded life. All of the tracks are messy and invariably either too brief or overlong. Some change course halfway through or display less glaring signs of schizophrenia. The syndrome is epitomised by a strangely distended track called Long-Haired Lady, which has several diverse parts, two of which feature decent tunes trying to get out. Similarly, the backseat of my car has a couple of good refrains that assert their independence amidst the overall confusion. McCartney, through George Martin, had become acquainted with the range of studio trickery that can be utilised to give colour, range and form to a song. But he seems to have become so obsessed with the possibilities thus offered that he'd blinded himself to the most crucial fact of the quality of the song itself. I think that these critics have got it so wrong because, yes, the songs are in many cases medleys, or one could describe them as clever, like Dear Boy, or production masterpieces like Uncle Albert, but there's strong melodies throughout, and there's quite a few nuggets on this album which are up there with Paul's very best, and I would quote Too Many People as being one of them. I'd quote the gorgeous Buddy Holly parody Eat at Home as being right up there. Heart of the Country, the opening track of side 2, is just superb. Uncle Albert, I think, is a masterpiece. Three Legs is a lot of fun. The tracks I have a slight problem with are Smile Away because the lyrics are silly, and Long-Haired Lady, which probably gives Linda's vocals too much prominence on that particular song. Elsewhere, and also the ending is a bit too reminiscent of Hey Jude. But elsewhere on the album, Linda's vocals are pretty storming and are about the best feature of the song Smile Away, and there's not too many. But Linda's vocals are probably the highlight of the entire song, and Monkberry Moon Delight, she's doing delightful backing vocals. And Elton John was on record at the time saying he was very impressed with Paul and Linda. So these days the Ram album tends to be praised to the heavens and is number one on an awful lot of people's lists, solo Beatles of all time. It's not quite up there for me at the top, but it's obviously one of Paul's best albums post-Beatles, including Wings. And I think when I did my ranking, I had it number 7 or 8, something like that. Not to say I don't love it, because anything which reaches my top 10 is by definition a big favourite of mine. After all, he has put out, 30 albums or so. But even in this Ultimate Music Guide, which came out a few years ago, they're very harsh with their track ratings. They're giving 4 stars to only Monkberry Moon Delight, 3 Legs, and Smile Away, of all things, and 3 stars to the rest of the tracks apart from Uncle Albert, which gets 2 stars, which I think is a travesty. I'm not going to bother reading you excerpts from this essay from Neil Spencer because I think he's wide of the mark, but again, it's up to people's opinion. I think the lyrics, I think one of the problems people had, or maybe still have, because I think even recently Q described this album as maddeningly inconsistent or something like that. Anyway, the lyrics there's not a great message behind it, and this was in stark contrast to George Harrison, All Things Must Pass, and John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, which had been covering spirituality and Primal Scream respectively, and here was Paul talking about, hanging out on the farm and love songs to Linda. Nothing wrong with that, and it was quite refreshing. And actually that was one of the great things about Paul's early solo career, is it was so unpretentious. And although a lot of effort was made in the production of this album, it's still relatively free of pretension, in my opinion. And I also would like to sing the praises of the single Another Day, which came out just before this album, but was recorded during the same sessions, and to me is probably the best song out of all of the songs from these sessions. And that's not saying that the album tracks are poor in any way. It's just it's a sign of my real deep affection for that first solo single from McCartney. What else can we say? He hasn't done too many tracks live from this album. He did. Andrew Brooks was telling me he came on at Hyde Park and did Ram On the ukulele, which must have been wonderful. He has done Too Many People on a fairly recent tour. And he did Eat at Home and Smile Away on the 72 Wings tour. But that's not really available in any good quality unless you want to buy the Red Rose Speedway box set. No videos done for this album, but Uncle Albert was later done as a video for the James Paul McCartney TV special. Productions by Paul, although George Martin did help with the strings on Uncle Albert, but was uncredited at the time, and it wasn't until the Ram archive box came out that we knew that George was involved, which was interesting. The band is stellar on this album. Denny Sewell is playing drums superbly and would be asked to join Wings and would play with them through most of 1973. Dave Spinoza on guitar, Hugh McCracken on guitar, along with Linda and Paul. And Hugh McCracken was asked to join Wings and turned Paul down, which apparently upset Paul. But Sam Wiles interviewed Denny Sewell just recently on his podcast, Paul or Nothing, and Hugh McCracken, he said the reason Hugh McCracken left was because he wanted to be with his family in America. And Paul only got to hear this years later and was saying, oh, that was the reason. And, he spent years being pissed off with Hugh for turning him down, and then found out that was the reason and changed everything. So that was great to hear. Unfortunately, Hugh McCracken no longer with us, but a great guitarist, played with Paul Simon and played with Lennon on Double Fantasy, of course. Dave Spinoza went on to play with Lennon on Mind Games. What else have we got to show you? The Thrillington album came out in '77 with instrumental versions of the Ram album, which was great to see. I've got a US copy on the Apple label, slightly different Apple in the US to the UK, and then I've obviously got the new vinyl with the archive. I've got the sheet music here to show you, which is quite interesting because it's got pictures, quite rare pictures, well, not all, rare, taking them at the airport going on the way to Mick Jagger's wedding, most of them. On the farm, and funny little captions like McCartney, a poet with amplification. That's an old picture, I think, or it looks to be. Let it be. Period. And then this picture, I hope that's not too high. Sorry. The caption is "Beatle with the golden touch," which is a bit naff. Anyway. This album was badly received when it came out by the critics, loved by the fans, sent almost to the top of the charts on both sides of the Atlantic, and it took a number of years before it was reevaluated. But nowadays it is in the top echelons of Beatles solo albums, so rated by the fans, and well deserved. And maybe it's partially an act of revenge against those stupid critics who laid into it at the time without much justification other than the fact that they were anti-Paul because for so-called breaking up the Beatles or being less cool than John and George because he was covering less serious lyrical matter. So what? That's Paul. He does it well. He's never been the most fantastic lyricist in the world, but he more than makes up for it with his melodies and the charm of his songs. So, thank you for watching. That was Ram, 50 years old on Monday. See you next time.